the GFR was normal and the patient was of normal weight, and therefore this is the recommended dose of heparin, of enoxaparin. So you see these colored squares here in the algorithm, which are based on the patient's data. So the algorithm shows where your patient is on this flow chart.
So you get them automatically colored where you're
yes, exactly. Yeah, and they can also be local algorithms or local flow charts for things like that. Then I take one more, and that's about intensifying dyslipidemia treatment for a patient. So this is a patient with a coronary heart disease. You have a reminder that the LDL is too high. The patient has type 1 diabetes. There is no fresh fundus photography. And here you see those links, what Robert just asked. So I click into that, and here I can first go into the description of the rule, which tells in which instance this rule will be triggered. And then you get into the evidence. Here is the evidence summary about the impact of screening for diabetic retinopathy, and even this evidence is graded according to the grade system, and this is grade D evidence that is useful. So this is the background knowledge behind the rule, which you were looking for, and some other. But now then, here is the user's role, and you can see the user is a doctor, but what if the user is a nurse? The nurses can also open the EHR, and now the same logic will provide, it's the same reminder than for the physician, but then at the end you see some specific information for the nurse, what the nurse can do, what the nurse should do in this situation, and whether she should consult the doctor, and how urgent this is, whether she should consult today or do something by herself. Then it's also the possibility that the patient has access to his or her own patient record, which we call the personal health record, the PHR. And then now these reminders are worded differently. They are worded for the patient, so that the patient can read and understand what he or she should do.
That's very nice. I like those features. One question on the nurse and the advice to the nurse. As inadequate as the literature is around what doctors do, it's even less adequate on what nurses do.
Yeah.
And I'm not blaming the nursing literature, it's just the reality of it. And even more difficult are what I call referral guidelines. When do you send somebody on to the next level? The science is non-existent. So these must be consensus opinions of your group of people at your company or your
That's true. Okay. That's true. And actually, who developed these guidelines? They are the guideline developers in Finland. So actually, our medical society who produces the current year guidelines, produces the EBM guidelines. So we also produce.
Did you have nurses involved in that as well?
We have nurses involved. Actually, we have sort of nurses guidelines which contain more than 1,000 guidelines for nurses, and they are also involved in developing the decision support. But I agree that many of those instructions, what the nurse should do, they are consensus-based. There is no high-quality evidence on what would be the delay for consulting a doctor, for instance, in a specific situation. Here is just one more feature. So here is a link, electronic forms, and automatically all the electronic forms, now there is some Finnish language because this is just a test site, but for instance here are many types of forms, and for instance risk, this is the score risk, it could be the Framingham risk, so all the information that can be populated on the calculator will be populated. This is about selecting anticoagulation treatment for a patient with atrial fibrillation. It calculates the CHATS score and then suggests warfarin, and even gives the NNT figures for avoiding stroke if you give warfarin to this patient. So
can I
this
ask
kind of
silly? I have a very silly question. Well, maybe it's not
yeah.
so silly. One of the problems we found with using color is that 10% of men are colorblind.
Yeah.
And when
Yeah.
people look at your screens, if they have difficulty identifying which is the highlighted box, yeah?
Yeah, that's, well, you see that there is a square around, but we are also looking, actually, we are trying to select the colors so that,
So it's more obvious.
that's a very, very good point, and we are taking that into account. So, these were some examples how the system works, and just show a little bit of technology. So what actually happens here when you use the system, so the EHR sends an XML message like this to the decision support service. Here is the patient data in XML message, and then what the EHR gets back, it's also an XML message which it will then show in its own user interface. So this is the interfacing between the systems. Okay, but now I continue. Maybe just one thing, it was discussed about these translations. So this system can also be used in Belgium. So I just changed the country and I changed the language. And what you see here now, it is Dutch language or the Flemish language used in Belgium. And if you get the reminders also, so you can see that these reminders are now in Dutch. And because French is another official language in Belgium, so now you just change the language again and get the same rule, and soon the reminder will be in French language. So this is the way. You only have to translate the reminders, and that is so much easier than translating the full guidelines. There was somebody who first translated from English to Dutch, and then another doctor who translated from Dutch to French in Belgium. And it took only 45 hours to translate all the reminders for this decision support system, while the translation of the full guidelines takes about 1 year. So it's much easier to transfer reminders than a full set of guidelines from one country to another. Okay, then something about how we can use this in quality measurement and in continuous professional development. So what I showed in this testing interface was that you use decision support for one individual patient. But what about running the rules for the panel of patients? For instance, the panel for the GP, the family physician, or the panel of patients visiting, for instance, the diabetic outpatient department in the hospital. So what you would get, that would be done as a batch run over the night, and in the morning you will find a list of your patients and the reminders behind its name. So for each patient you have the reminders how you could improve their care. And now we can analyze this, because what happens, this is an inbuilt feature of this EBNet's application, that whenever the request message is sent from the electronic patient record, so the request message containing all the structured data for the patient will also be recorded in the log file. And when the response comes from the decision support application, so the response and the quality measures inbuilt to the response will also be recorded in the log file. So actually this is a quality reporting system. Here is an example, this virtual health check. We call it a virtual health check when we run all the reminders or execute them in the group of patients. Here the rules were executed in the population of 16,000 primary care patients in Finland. And this is just an example of one rule. This rule checks whether a person with asthma or COPD who is using beta blockers, whether it's the right type of beta blocker, the selective beta blocker. And there were 36 people who were using beta blocker, 32 were using the right type, and 4 were using unselective beta blockers. And for those 4, there was a reminder that you should change the drug to another type. So the quality measure was 89%, so many percent of the patients were using the right type of beta blocker. And this is a way how actually all rules can create the quality measures automatically. Here is just a list of some rules, how many times they were triggered in the population of 16,000 people. And we can go into the website where you can show a real-time list. Here are the different reminders. We can see that there are some reminders that were triggered for several hundreds of times for this population. For instance, there were 430 patients who should be treated with a statin because they have high total cardiovascular risk, but they were not using a statin, and so on.
Are you using personal identifiers for this?
Yes, if you perform this as a GP, so you get a list of your patients with the personal identifiers, and you can actually click into the patient record from that list. But if you are doing qualitative statistics, then that's anonymous. It does not contain the identifiers for the patients.
So I've had a chance this week to spend a little bit of time in Danish GPs' practices, and one of the things I very much like about their system is that it actually gives the GP the ability to kind of play with the data in a way that allows him or her to think about, for example, they might want to rank order from the highest hemoglobin A1C to the lowest among their patients. Would your system allow that?
Our system is now collecting the data and building the quality measures, but actually we have not yet built a fancy user interface as you have, and that would be very nice to collaborate on. We are working on the user interface like that, but it's not ready yet. So here you can just see a very rough. This doesn't look nice, but you can see here those quality measures as percentages. But what is important is that for every rule we have, you can automatically produce the quality measure, but then you have to decide whether they are valid quality measures, whether they actually reflect the quality of treatment. And here you come to the problem. If you look at this screening hyperthyroidism and recent onset atrial fibrillation, you should have thyroid function tested if you get atrial fibrillation. The quality measure was 52% only. Is that true? I don't believe it's true. The patients went straight to the hospital, and hopefully the TSH was taken there, but it was not recorded in the primary care laboratory file, so we don't know, because the lab test results are in 2 different places. And that's a big problem everywhere, and that's a big what you mentioned in the beginning.
And that actually also touches on another issue where I think we have the most room for improvement around the support tools. Some things are more important than others.
Yeah.
So there's sort of a sensitivity adjustment to it, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody, even if it's a 1 out of 100 chance, but it's a really bad one,
exactly.
You're probably going to want to give that a lot more attention than a 50 out of 100 chance where it's no big deal.
Exactly.
And that's hard. I mean, it's hard to do that in these tools.
Yeah.
You do by the size of the font, you know, does it flash at you? Some things are much more important.
What you can do actually is that you can rate the importance of the reminders. For instance, if the patient has a very high serum potassium value, which is 6, so you can give a red alert, and also when you give the quality measure, of course, you should adjust this differently. This is actually a never event. You should not have a patient like this at least for a long time. You should react in hours or in minutes in cases like this.
Yes. So you probably would flag this one.
Yeah.
Just with a little sign.
Exactly. You have to back, and one thing, for instance, would be that what I would like to have is I would like to have it as a text message into my cell phone, so that if the lab test results, I would like to know it immediately when it came, so that, and then I would just send the order via my cell phone what should be done to the patient wherever I am.